I'm Andrew Horn, one of the official talents here for Family Films Productions YouTube channel. Back in the 1980s, there was a book and cassette tape released of the story of Return to Oz. Some of the scenes in this recording were actually taken from the rare deleted scenes from Return to Oz. Enjoy this look at the complete recording, read by Anna Mosley, newly found in our Return to Oz archives. Gosh, that tape was deep in a box. I wonder what I will uncover next. Until next time, please do like and subscribe to our channel. More to come from all of us very soon.
Return to Oz. A long time ago, a little girl called Dorothy Gale lived on a farm in Kansas with her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry. She led a quiet, uneventful life until one fateful day when a great tornado swept through the prairies, destroying their house and crops. That was the day when Dorothy first visited the land of Oz. Oz was a magical kingdom with a dazzling emerald city at its heart. Dorothy could never forget all the wonderful adventures she had there, and the friends she had made, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion. She told her aunt and uncle all about the land of Oz and its extraordinary people, but they were much too worried about rebuilding the farm to listen. They said it was all in her imagination. Dorothy just knew that Oz was real, and she was sure that one day she would go back there. This is the story of how it happened, when Dorothy made another amazing journey in the Return to Oz. The Key to Oz. One bright morning, Dorothy Gale was in the farmyard with her little dog Toto and her pet hen Bellina, searching anxiously for eggs among the straw of the nesting boxes. "Oh, come on, Bellina," she wailed despairingly. "You must have laid an egg somewhere. Aunt Em says she'll have to make you into a stew for supper if you don't start laying again soon." But Bellina took no notice. She was too busy scratching at something in the dust. "What have you got there?" asked Dorothy, picking it up. At first sight, it was just an old door key. But then she looked more closely. Her finger traced a zigzag shape, like a Z, which ran through the circle at the top of the key. O-Z. Oz, whispered Dorothy. She stood stock still as all the memories of her exciting adventures in the land of Oz came flooding back to her. Meanwhile, her aunt and uncle were discussing Dorothy. They were worried sick about her. "She's always in a dream world," Aunt Em was saying. "She doesn't sleep a wink at night, and her head's full of strange ideas during the day. Tin men and scarecrows and cowardly lions and this place called Oz. I just don't know where she gets it all from." "She's never been the same since the tornado," said Uncle Henry sadly. "Well, that was 6 months ago, and it's time she had some help," said Aunt Em firmly. "I'm taking her to that clinic I showed you in the newspaper." "Electric healing? But what on earth is that?" said Uncle Henry uncertainly. He sighed. "Well, you do what you think's right, Em." The clinic was some miles away, and Aunt Em was anxious to get started. Sadly, Dorothy packed her bag. She knew her friends in Oz were in trouble, but Aunt Em just thought she was crazy. As they rolled away from the farm in the horse and cart, poor Toto was frantic at being left behind. He ran miserably after them until he couldn't keep up any longer. It was a bleak journey through the desolate countryside. Suddenly, Dorothy shivered with foreboding and clutched the key that said Oz for comfort, turning it over and over in her pocket. It was late afternoon by the time Aunt Em drew the horse and cart to a halt outside the clinic. A nurse with a long, severe face showed them into the doctor's office, and a bearded man with bright, gleaming eyes came forward to greet them. "I'm Dr. Worley, and this is Nurse Wilson," he said. "Now then, what's the trouble?" Dorothy began to tell him about her visit to the wonderful land of Oz. "And I had these magic ruby slippers. You put them on and click the heels 3 times, and whatever you want happens. And today I found this key, which proves Oz is real." Dr. Worley looked carefully at the Oz key. "But Dorothy, this is just an old door key." Obviously, he didn't believe a word she had said. "Well," said Dr. Worley brightly, "I think we have just the thing for you," and he pointed to a tall metal box with lots of knobs and switches. "This electric machine will get rid of all these bad waking dreams of yours and let you sleep again at night." While he explained the machine to Aunt Em, Dorothy was looking anxiously around the room. She started at the sight of her own reflection in the glass panels of the strange machine, because someone else was there. It was a girl with long yellow hair in a white dress. Dorothy spun round and saw the girl in the doorway, but in an instant she was gone. "You do understand, don't you, Dorothy?" Aunt Em was saying. "I'll be back next week." She squeezed her tightly and left. Nurse Wilson led Dorothy to a small, bare room. "Stay here until we come for you," she said sternly, shutting the door. Dorothy peered out through the window, and again she saw the reflection of the yellow-haired girl. She was right there in the room. Dorothy turned, and the girl held out to her a pumpkin head, carved into a jolly face. "This is for you, because soon it's Halloween. Why are you here, Dorothy?" "I suppose because I can't sleep properly." But no sooner had Dorothy spoken than there was a great flicker of lightning outside. In an instant, the mysterious girl had vanished. As the storm grew, the wind rattled the windows and the light bulb swung on its flex, casting strange shadows across the walls. Between the claps of thunder, Dorothy was sure she heard dreadful screams coming from deep inside the mansion. She perched nervously on the edge of the bed, cold and afraid. It seemed like hours before Nurse Wilson returned with 2 male attendants wheeling a creaking metal trolley. The men lifted Dorothy onto it, strapping her down so tightly that she couldn't move. The wheels squeaked horribly as they took her back to Dr. Worley's room. Dorothy's heart was thumping with fright, and she had turned very pale indeed. "You see these earmuffs," said Dr. Worley. "I'm just going to put them over your ears, then switch on the current. They'll draw all those unpleasant dreams out of your mind." Dorothy was horrified. Outside, the storm raged on as the doctor placed the strange earpieces on her head. But just as Dr. Worley reached for the switch, there was an enormous clap of thunder, a flash of lightning, and the room was plunged into darkness. "The power's failed," exclaimed Dr. Worley irritably. "I'll have to go and start the generator in the basement." No sooner had he and Nurse Wilson left than Dorothy heard soft footsteps coming towards the trolley, and someone started to fumble at the straps that tied her down. "Quickly, we've got to get you out of here," said a friendly voice. It was the girl with yellow hair. Free at last, Dorothy leapt off the trolley, and both girls ran as fast as they could through the darkened house and out through the front door. Now they could hear quite clearly strange cries rising from the cellars. "What is that?" Dorothy shuddered. "It's the people who've been damaged by the electric machine," whispered the yellow-haired girl. "But come, quickly, there's no time to lose." And she was right, for at that moment the lights came on again. Alarm bells rang out all over the mansion, and dogs started to bark excitedly as the 2 girls fled through the grounds. Looking round, Dorothy saw Nurse Wilson and the 2 male attendants. They were closing in on them fast. She put on an extra spurt, stumbling through the wind and rain, while brambles caught and tugged at her clothes. Finally, the two girls burst through the trees and found themselves on the edge of a rushing river. There was no way back, so without a moment's hesitation, in they leapt. The swirling current sent them hurtling downstream. "Come back here this instant!" screamed Nurse Wilson. But as she spoke, she slipped and fell on the muddy shore. There she sprawled, weeping with rage and frustration, the girls now way beyond her reach. Dorothy was caught up and tossed from side to side by the rushing torrent. For a while, she struggled frantically. Then she grabbed something floating in the stormy waters. It turned out to be a chicken coop of all things. "Climb up inside it," Dorothy heard the girl shout above the roar of the water. "You'll be all right now. I can't stay." "Hold on, don't let go," Dorothy begged, but it was too late. The girl had vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared. Dorothy hauled herself into the coop and huddled into the corner. She was so exhausted by her escape that for the first time in many months, she fell into a deep and peaceful sleep. In Search of the Scarecrow. When Dorothy awoke, the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the coop was quite still. Peering out, Dorothy found she was on dry land, with not a drop of water in sight. She heard a clucking sound and looked down to see a hen nestling against the wooden rails of the coop. "Bellina!" she cried in amazement, staring at her pet hen. "How on earth did you get here?" "A good question," clucked the hen, fluffing out her feathers in the sun. "Where exactly is here, anyway?" "Bellina!" exclaimed Dorothy, even more amazed. "You can talk." Then she stopped and thought hard. "The only place I know where animals can talk is Oz. Oh, Bellina, we must be in Oz. Let's go and see if we can find the Emerald City and the Scarecrow." "The Scarecrow?" scoffed Bellina. "You mean we've come all this way just to see a scarecrow?" "Yes, of course," cried Dorothy excitedly. "He's the king of Oz." Then Dorothy scooped up Bellina and scrambled out of the coop. She headed for the shade of the nearby trees, but soon stopped with a gasp. Growing in the branches of the nearest tree were dozens of tin pails surrounded by paper leaves. Each one said lunch on the side, and Dorothy, who suddenly realized she was very hungry indeed, found that lunch was exactly what was inside them. "How wonderful!" cried Dorothy in delight. "Why, this is definitely Oz." They shared one pail, then, taking another to eat later, they set off into the wood. In the sunlight ahead, Dorothy could see something yellow, glinting. Yes, there it was, the yellow brick road that led to the Emerald City. But now it was broken up and overgrown. Dorothy was puzzled, but she hurried along the road all the same. So intent was she on reaching the Emerald City that she didn't see the mysterious face which appeared, then vanished in the rocks along the way. But the face saw her. Deep underground, it whispered to an unseen presence. "Your Majesty, she has come back and she has brought a chicken with her."
"A chicken?"
Through the smoky cavern, there was a deep and troubled rumbling. A terrible sight met Dorothy's eyes at the end of the yellow brick road. There in front of her was the Emerald City, once such a beautiful sight, glowing with a green light from the sparkling emeralds which covered every building. Now it lay in ruins, and there wasn't a single emerald or precious stone to be seen. As they walked through the silent, rubble-filled streets, Dorothy frowned. She was puzzled by what she saw. tattered posters flapped in the breeze, and slogans saying, "Beware of the Wheelers," were scrawled on broken-down walls. She had no idea what all this could mean. As she looked around the corner, Dorothy let out a gasp of astonishment. All the inhabitants of the city had been turned to stone where they stood. There was a circle of young women dancing, frozen to the spot, and all without their heads. Worst of all, there was a motionless tin man with an axe, and a lion turned to stone with one paw outstretched. "Oh, no! It's the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion!" Dorothy cried in horror. "My friends have all been turned to stone. Whatever has happened?" But she didn't have to wait long to find out. At that moment, there was a strange squealing sound, and spinning round, Dorothy saw a most peculiar, nasty-looking creature, dressed in a tailcoat of many colours. Strangest of all, he had very long arms and moved along on all fours with wheels in place of his hands and feet. "It must be a Wheeler," cried Dorothy in alarm. "Quick, Bellina, run!" Bellina fluttered her wings in fright, and the two of them tore down an alleyway, the Wheeler in hot pursuit, with many more Wheelers following behind. Dorothy reached the end of the alleyway and realized it was a dead end. They were trapped. As she backed up against the wall, she felt the outline of a door in the massive stone, and there was a keyhole too. Then she had an idea. The Oz key Bellina had found back home. Maybe it would work here. She drew it from her pocket and frantically turned it in the lock. With the Wheelers almost upon them, the door swung open, and Dorothy and Bellina darted inside, slamming the door behind them. "Go away! Leave us alone!" Dorothy called through the keyhole. "We haven't done anything wrong."
"Oh, yes," sneered the head Wheeler. "You've got a chicken in there with you, haven't you? The Gnome King hates chickens. No chickens are ever to be allowed in Oz." "Who is the Gnome King?" asked Dorothy in dismay. "The ruler of Oz, of course," said the Wheeler impatiently. "But the Scarecrow? What about the Scarecrow?" "The Scarecrow!" laughed the head Wheeler, and all the other Wheelers roared with mocking laughter too. Dorothy turned away from the door in disgust, but started with fright as she saw the outline of a figure in a dim corner of the room. "It's all right," said Bellina. "He's not alive. He's just a heap of old junk." "So he is," said Dorothy, peering at him curiously. "He's made of copper. And look, he's clockwork." "Well, what are you waiting for?" clucked Bellina impatiently. "Wind him up." Dorothy turned a key under the copper man's arm, and he blinked his eyes and started to talk.
"Good morning, young lady," he said politely in a slow, mechanical voice. "Are you Dorothy Gale?" "Why, yes, I am," said Dorothy in surprise. "I am Tick-Tock. I have been expecting you. The Scarecrow told me to wait for you here." "Oh, Mr. Tick-Tock, please tell me where the Scarecrow is." "I do not know. I have been in here for a very long time, and my clockwork has wound down. But if you keep me wound up, I'll help you find him. Now, open the door, please." "But you can't go out there," warned Dorothy. "The Wheelers are there, waiting to get us." "I can take care of them," said Tick-Tock confidently, and he seized Dorothy's pail and made for the door. He flung it open, but there were no Wheelers in sight. Cautiously, Dorothy, Tick-Tock, and Bellina ventured down the alleyway. And there, at the end, the Wheelers were waiting. Tick-Tock swung the pail furiously at the Wheelers' heads. Bang, crash, clonk, clang. They spun around, howling in fear, and rolled away as fast as they could, all except for the head Wheeler, who was caught in the strong metal grip of Tick-Tock's hands. "What happened to the Emerald City?" demanded Dorothy. "And who is the Gnome King?" The Wheeler gulped and said nothing until Tick-Tock started to shake him like a dog with a rat.
All right, he wailed in terror. I'll tell you, the Nome King is the new ruler of Oz. He conquered the Emerald City, took away all the emeralds, and turned everyone to stone.
But where is the Nome King? And where is the Scarecrow? Asked Dorothy, bewildered.
I don't know, said the Wheeler. Tick-Tock shook him again. I don't, he protested. The only one who knows is...
Yes, said Dorothy impatiently. Who? Tell us.
Princess Mombi, stuttered the Wheeler, looking terrified. Take us to her, said Tick-Tock, threatening the Wheeler again with a tin pail.
Cringing with fear, he led them to the steps of Mombi's palace.
Then Tick-Tock let him go.
They tried the great iron door, and slowly it swung open. The three friends stepped inside. Prisoners in the palace. Once inside the palace, Dorothy, Billina, and Tick-Tock made their way through a huge vaulted hallway festooned with cobwebs. "Which way shall we go?" whispered Dorothy, looking around in bewilderment. Then they heard faint strains of music coming from above, so together they stepped forward and climbed the great flight of stairs. Guided by the music, they found a great mirrored throne room where a beautiful young woman was sitting playing the mandolin, admiring her reflection in the mirrors that surrounded her on every side. "Pardon us, miss, but are you Princess Mombi?" inquired Dorothy.
"Yes, I am," replied the young woman, who didn't seem surprised to see them. She rose lazily from her chair. "Come with me," she said, looking at Dorothy. "Your friends can wait here. It is time for me to change." She led Dorothy into a room full of numbered cabinets with glass doors. To Dorothy's horror, she saw that each cabinet contained the head of a beautiful girl. Dorothy shivered as she remembered all the headless statues in the Emerald City. She stared in disbelief as the princess took off her head and placed it in an empty cabinet. Then, taking a ruby key from a chain around her wrist, she opened another cabinet and took out a beautiful head with ivory-coloured skin and long dark hair. "I think number 4 will do this afternoon," she said, setting it in place on her neck. "What do you think?"
I think it's very beautiful," gulped Dorothy.
"I should hope so," said the princess. "Now, I should like to know who you are."
"I'm Dorothy Gale," replied Dorothy, backing away as the princess drew closer to her, studying her face intently. "What happened to the Emerald City, and where is the Scarecrow?" asked Dorothy.
"The Nome King took the Scarecrow and all the emeralds back to his mountain. He turned everyone else back to stone." Princess Mombi paused. "Dorothy Gale, you will be quite attractive when you've grown up a bit more," she mused, gazing deeply into Dorothy's eyes, and a smile spread slowly across her face. "I shall have to lock you in the tower for a few years until your head is ready, and then I shall take it for my collection."
"No! Oh, no!" Dorothy cried out. But Mombi grabbed her in a strong grip and pulled her back to the throne room.
"Help!" yelled Dorothy. "Billina! Tick-Tock! Help!"
But Tick-Tock was powerless to move. His clockwork had run down again. The princess seized Billina and dragged her up the stairs with Dorothy. Mombi flung them into a dingy room in the palace tower, full of cobwebs and musty old furniture, and bolted the door. Dorothy and Billina looked around in despair for a way of escape. To their surprise, when their eyes became accustomed to the dim lighting, they saw a huge orange moon face staring up at them from one corner of the room.
"What is it?" clucked Billina. "A man or a melon?"
"I'm a pumpkin," said the face in an offended tone. "My name is Jack Pumpkinhead." Jack Pumpkinhead was in a dreadful state. His long wooden limbs had come away from his body and lay scattered about all over the floor. While Dorothy put him together again, he told her the sorry tale of how he came to be in such a mess. Jack had been made by a lovely slave girl who had served Princess Mombi. She had stolen some special magic powder from the princess to bring him to life. But when Mombi found out, she was furious. She had thrown Jack in the tower, and he hadn't seen his mother since. "So, you see, I don't know what became of her," Jack gulped miserably. "How dreadful for you," cried Dorothy, and for a moment she was quite overcome with sadness. "Well, it's no use crying," she said at last. "We've got to do something. This magic powder you mentioned, is there any of it left?" "The powder of life? Oh, yes, lots of it," Jack told her confidently. "Mombi keeps it in cabinet 31 in her dressing room." Dorothy closed her eyes and thought hard for a long time. And when she opened them, she had a plan. Dorothy Goes Flying. Dorothy, Jack and Billina waited patiently until it got dark. Then Jack slipped his long wooden arm between the window bars and managed to unlatch the door. Leaving Billina on guard, he and Dorothy crept downstairs towards Tick-Tock. "Tick-Tock," whispered Dorothy as she wound him up again. "Go upstairs with Jack and do exactly what he says." Up in the tower room, Tick-Tock, Billina and Jack set to work. They were making a creature from whatever bits and pieces they could find. First of all, they took down an animal's head, which had been mounted on the wall. It looked just like the head of a moose, but it was bright green. They used an old sofa for the creature's body, a broomstick for his tail, and the giant leaves of a palm plant for his wings. Finally, they tied him all together with curtain cord. Meanwhile, holding her breath, Dorothy had sneaked into Mombi's bedroom. Hardly daring to breathe, she eased the key from around her wrist and crept past the sleeping princess into the dressing room. She found cabinet 31, the only one in the room without a glass door, and opened it nervously. She had to stifle a cry of terror, for there, next to a jar of powder of life, was Princess Mombi's real head. Its eyes were closed, but the face was that of a horrible witch. Dorothy reached through the jars and potions, and then a box fell with a loud clatter. The witch's eyes flew open, the head twisted and snapped at Dorothy's hand. Dorothy grabbed the jar, and clutching it to her, she ran blindly back through the palace. Immediately the hideous head began to wail, and its terrible cries woke Mombi. The headless princess leapt out of bed and dashed furiously into the dressing room. Frightened and desperate, Dorothy reached the tower room and sprinkled the powder of life all over the strange sofa creature. Nothing happened. "Jack, you must try and remember. What are the magic words?" cried Dorothy.
"Hurry, Dorothy," called Tick-Tock. "Mombi is coming."
She studied the box and read uncertainly, "Wio, Tio, Pio." At that, the moose's eyes began to move, his wings to beat, and they all scrambled aboard. The creature lurched and staggered, and then the door burst open. Princess Mombi, wearing her own hideous head, loomed in the doorway. "So, escaping!" she screeched in a dreadful voice of rage. "Fly, fly!" urged Dorothy. The creature took one look at Mombi and beat his wings with all his might. Shuddering violently, he rose from the floor. The others hung on for dear life as they crashed out through the window, lumbering away into the sky as the shouts and screams of the furious princess faded into the far distance.
What am I, anyway?
Asked the moose head as they flew through the night sky. You're just a thing we built and brought to life. You're a Gump.
I may not last very long. I don't feel too well put together.
Dorothy slept through the long night flight, heading, she hoped, for the Nome King's mountain to rescue the Scarecrow. But she awoke with a shock to find the cords which had held the Gump together were now fraying and broken.
I'm coming apart,
yelled the Gump.
Abandon ship,
Squawked Bellina. Battered and shaken, they finally came to rest on a snowy ledge. High above them rose the slopes of a dark, forbidding mountain. Dorothy shivered. As they picked themselves up, none of them noticed the mysterious face appearing once more on the rocks overlooking Dorothy and her friends. It stared hard for a moment, then silently withdrew. Deep inside the mountain, a voice reported to the unseen presence of the Nome King himself. Somehow, she has managed to escape from Mombi, but at least there is no sign of the chicken. The Nome King was relieved, for chickens were the creatures he most hated and feared. But little did he know that Bellina was safely tucked away inside Jack's hollow pumpkin head. Dorothy meets the Nome King. There was a loud rumbling deep in the mountain, and the huge menacing face began to form in the rocky cliff in front of Dorothy.
Tell me who you are,
Boomed the Nome King.
and why you have come all this way to my kingdom.
Taking a deep breath and trying to stop her knees shaking, Dorothy stepped forward and addressed the face. My name is Dorothy Gale, Your Majesty.
Not the Dorothy Gale from Kansas,
said the Nome King with a mocking smile. Yes, that's right, and I've come to ask you to free the Scarecrow and to restore the Emerald City. The Nome King chuckled and laughed louder and louder until the rocks split wide open. Dorothy tumbled down through a magical stream of jewels and gemstones, and landed in an underground cavern studded with glittering crystals. The Nome King was seated on a huge rock throne. He seemed to grow more lifelike and menacing every minute.
It's no use looking for the Scarecrow, he laughed spitefully. You won't recognize him, I'm afraid, because I've turned him into a rather amusing ornament for my palace.
Dorothy gasped and began to sob as though her heart would break.
Well, said the Nome King slyly, I didn't realize he meant so much to you, but I'll give you a chance to free him. We'll play a little game. One by one, you and your friends can go and see my ornament collection. Each of you has 3 chances to guess which ornament is the Scarecrow. If you touch the right object and say Oz at the same time, the Scarecrow will be changed back into himself again.
The 4 friends put their heads together. All right, we accept, Dorothy decided. And with that, the rocks parted to reveal a secret door. The Gump was the first to go into the ornament rooms. There were 2 distant rolls of thunder, then one tremendous crash. What was that? Cried Jack.
Oh, after 3 wrong guesses, he turns into an ornament too, replied the king with a chuckle.
But you didn't tell us that, said Dorothy.
You didn't ask.
Perhaps you'd prefer to visit my fiery furnace.
There was nothing they could do. Both Jack and Tick-Tock tried their luck and failed to return. The Gnome King turned to Dorothy with a smile of satisfaction.
By the way, he said, raising the hem of his gown, are you sure you didn't come back for these?
The ruby slippers, she gasped in dismay. You're wearing my ruby slippers.
Of course, my dear, smirked the Gnome King. I'm so glad you lost them. They're very powerful. In fact, I couldn't have conquered Oz without them. Well, Dorothy Gale, it's your turn now.
Dorothy stepped bravely forward and found herself in 2 enormous rooms crammed with ornaments. How am I ever going to choose the right ornament from all these? Wandering in a daze, eventually she picked up an alabaster bowl and muttered the word Oz. Apart from a faint rumble of thunder, nothing happened. She tried a crystal vase. Nothing happened. Only one guess left, she murmured fearfully. But the more she looked at the ornaments, the more confused she became. Deciding to leave her fate to chance, she closed her eyes and reached out blindly. She felt a mantel shelf filled with objects. Watching her, the king breathed nervously. Dorothy seized a green crystal and whispered, Oz. Dorothy, exclaimed a delighted voice. She opened her eyes slowly, hardly daring to look, and stared in wonder at the untidy figure standing before her. Scarecrow, Dorothy cried for joy. Oh, it really is you. She threw her arms around him and gave him a great big hug. But we haven't got a moment to lose. We must find my friends, she said urgently. They've all been turned into ornaments. You were a crystal, a green crystal, Dorothy said thoughtfully. Maybe that's it, Scarecrow. Emeralds are green. Maybe people from the Emerald City turn into green things. The Scarecrow spotted a green inkwell. As soon as Dorothy touched it and called out, Oz, it vanished into thin air. And there was the Gump. Oh, Gump, laughed Dorothy. Come on, help us to find the others. While Dorothy was busy in the ornament rooms, Princess Mombi had sped through the great rock tunnel which led to the Nome Kingdom. Angry and frightened, she lay before the Gnome King. Dorothy Gale has come back, she announced breathlessly.
She's already here, you fool, the king retorted. You let her escape. It's all your fault, Mombi. No doubt you'll tell me next that you've let Ozma escape as well.
Ozma? No, never, protested Mombi. But Mombi's fate was decided. As the king grew more and more angry, a great iron cage descended to imprison the terrified princess. Inside the ornament room, Dorothy and her friends watched in terror as the whole room began to shake. There was a dreadful noise, and the Gnome King's gigantic head erupted right through the floor. As the ornaments crashed around them, the Scarecrow dived to catch a green porcelain vase. Dorothy raced to touch it. Oz, she cried, and at once Jack Pumpkinhead appeared in the arms of the Scarecrow.
Stop! Stop!
Boomed the enormous rock face. In his hand, he shook a cage with a screaming Mombi trapped inside. But we haven't finished guessing, shouted Dorothy. You promised us.
I'm tired of games, replied the king. I'm tired of you all.
And in his fury, he opened his huge mouth and swallowed Princess Mombi with one mighty gulp. A long and terrible scream echoed through the rocks. Dorothy and her friends were trapped. The king stretched out his hand, swept up poor Jack, and dangled him above his gaping mouth. No! Shrieked Dorothy. But with Jack halfway to his mouth, the Gnome King stopped. An expression of complete terror spread across his face. In the silence that followed, everyone heard quite clearly. Bellina peeped out of her hiding place inside Jack's head. The king froze. As the others watched in stunned silence, the stemmed top cap of Jack's head fell off, and a newly laid egg teetered on the edge. The next moment it had dropped into the king's mouth and plummeted down his throat.
An egg, he choked. It's poison! Poison!
A flash of lightning lit the room, followed by a deafening crash of thunder. Splintering rocks and falling stones filled the air. A cloud of dust billowed upwards, and when it cleared, there in front of them were the broken pieces of the Nome King's body. But Dorothy noticed something glowing brightly among the rubble. She bent down and pulled out her ruby slippers. With the Nome King gone, his whole palace started to collapse. As the walls began to topple all around her, Dorothy tore at the laces of her old shoes. "Hurry, hurry," clucked Bellina, hopping up and down impatiently. A great wave of volcanic lava surged into the room and tongues of fire leapt towards them. Dorothy stood up in the ruby slippers and clicked her heels. "I wish all of us from Oz to return there safely," she cried. The very next moment, they found themselves tumbling down a grassy slope overlooking the ruins of the Emerald City. The Queen of Oz. Wearing her gleaming ruby slippers, Dorothy stood on the hillside facing the ruined city and clicked her heels. "I command all the emeralds to be returned to the Emerald City," she called out. "And I command everyone who was turned to stone to come back to life." At first, a faint green glow shrouded the city, gradually becoming brighter until the whole place was lit by the brilliant sparkle of 1,000,000 emeralds. "Oh, isn't it wonderful?" she cried. "Everything is all right now, except... Oh, no, Tick-Tock, where is he?" "We never found him," said the Scarecrow haltingly. "Oh, Tick-Tock," murmured Dorothy, and a large tear rolled down her cheeks. As the Gump lowered his head in sorrow, Dorothy noticed something shiny caught in his antlers. It was a medal rimmed with emeralds.
"Oh,"
said the surprised Gump.
"It must have come from the ornament room."
"It's made of copper," gasped Dorothy. And it's green. Do you suppose... Could it be... Tick-Tock?" She took a deep breath and touched the medal. Oz. "Hello, everyone," said a familiar clockwork voice, and Dorothy's tears turned to tears of joy as she hugged Tick-Tock and welcomed him back to life. Dorothy and her friends ran excitedly down into the streets of the Emerald City. The Tin Man turned from grey stone to gleaming tin. The Cowardly Lion yawned and stretched, and 30 headless statues of beautiful young women came back to life, their heads now perfectly restored. The bewildered Wheelers were powerless. The dreadful Princess Mombi had reappeared, still locked in the iron cage, but now she was no more than a pitiful old hag. Happily together again, the friends formed a procession to the palace to re-crown their king, the Scarecrow. The citizens of Oz thronged into the mirrored throne room, which held no terrors now. The Scarecrow took his place on the throne, and Dorothy, standing beside him, lifted the crown above his head. "No," he cried. "Wait." "What is it?" asked Dorothy with a puzzled frown. "I was never meant to be king," said the Scarecrow. "And besides, the crown hurts my head and makes it difficult to think." "Well, who will rule if you don't?" inquired Dorothy. "You can rule over us, Dorothy." "Me?" said Dorothy in a stunned whisper. "Yes, Dorothy, Queen of Oz," everyone began to chant. Dorothy waited until the noise faded. Then she spoke. "You're the best friends anyone could ever have, but I have to go back. Aunt Em and Uncle Henry must be worried about me by now, and Toto will be missing me too. Oh, I'd forgotten Toto." She paused, her eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "It's all right, Dorothy," said Jack sadly. "We understand." "Thank you," said Dorothy gratefully. "I just wish I could be in both places at the same time." But she had forgotten that she was still wearing the ruby slippers. Suddenly, all eyes were on Dorothy's reflection in the mirrored wall. An awed silence spread around the room. "It's me," whispered Dorothy, stepping towards it. "But it's not me." Where her reflection should have been, between Tick-Tock and Jack, there was the image of another girl wearing a beautiful silk dress and satin slippers. "Hello, Dorothy," said the reflection. "Don't you remember me? Please help me out of the mirror." Dorothy blinked in astonishment as she recognized her friend, the yellow-haired girl who had rescued her from Dr. Worley's clinic. She held out her hand and drew the girl through the mirror. "I'm so glad to see you again," Dorothy said to her. "Please tell me your name." "Ozma," said the girl. Everyone was quite stunned, but none more than Jack Pumpkinhead. "Oh," he cried excitedly, "it's her! It's my real mother!" But then another voice spoke up from the crowd. It was the beautiful girl who had once been Mombi's number 4 head. "Ozma's father was the original King of Oz, but she was given to Mombi as a slave, and the Gnome King said she must never be allowed to escape. So Mombi imprisoned her inside the mirror, and she was never able to get out until you freed her, Dorothy. She is the rightful Queen of Oz." So, at last, the people of Oz had found their true ruler. The Scarecrow was overjoyed, and while he placed the crown on Ozma's head, Dorothy knelt to put the ruby slippers on her feet. "Now, please, will you wish me back to Kansas?" asked Dorothy. "On one condition," said Ozma. "I will look in to see you from time to time, and if you ever wish to return to Oz, I will make it so." A mist began to swirl around Dorothy, and among the voices calling goodbye to her, she heard Billina. "Billina, aren't you coming with me?"
"Oh, no, I don't want to go back to that humdrum world again," she clucked. "I much prefer it here."
The mist swirled thicker, and Dorothy saw all her dear friends reaching out to say goodbye. "Goodbye! I love you all," she called out. "Goodbye! Goodbye!" When the mist had cleared, Dorothy found herself lying on a riverbank, very muddy and bedraggled. As she sat up and looked around, she heard a familiar barking. "Toto! Aunt Em! Uncle Henry!" cried Dorothy joyfully. "Dorothy! Oh, Dorothy!" exclaimed Uncle Henry. "We've been searching for days to find you." "We thought you were lost forever," Aunt Em shuddered. "If only I'd known what sort of place it was before I took you there." Once Dorothy was back home, Uncle Henry completed the farmhouse in no time at all, and it wasn't long before she settled down as though she'd never been away at all. But one day, she did see Ozma smiling back at her as she looked into the bedroom mirror. And then Dorothy smiled too, until the image faded, remembering the world of Oz and all the wonderful friends she would never forget.